Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. Welcome to the last day, our final day of the World Councils and Gifted and Talented Conference. My name is Eleanor van Gerven. I'm Secretary of the World Council, and I am very proud and very honored to be able to introduce to you today Dr. Kadir Bahar. Dr. Bahar was the winner of the Emerging Scholar Award in Gifted Education. And before I start introducing Dr. Bahar, I would like to thank the Center for Talented Development at Northwestern University for sponsoring today's keynote. Dr. Bahar's keynote focuses on bridging excellence gaps in STEM education. Now, let me properly introduce Dr. Bahar. Dr. Bahar is an assistant professor of gifted and creative education in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Georgia. After graduating from Bilkent University with a degree in industrial engineering, he completed his PhD in special education with a focus on gifted education and a minor in mathematics education at the University of Arizona. Before his position at UGA, Dr. Bahar was a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, where he served as the coordinator of graduate programs in gifted education and directed youth programs for talented learners, including young in college, math, cycle or girls, and STEM for young scholar programs. Dr. Bahar's research explores two overlapping but distinct strands. First, he investigates excellence gaps, in particular gender and racial disparities in advanced academic programs in STEM subjects. And second, his second area of research focuses on educational strategies for enhancing mathematical creativity and problem solving in pre-K-12 settings. Well, there's lots more to tell about Dr. Bahar, but for now, I think I'll leave it for this, and I would like to give the floor to Dr. Bahar. Kadir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for this nice, beautiful introduction. Greetings to all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody all over the world. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation today. I am a little excited, but moreover, I am very pleased and honored to be here as one of the keynote speakers of the day. Before I start my presentation very quickly, I can introduce myself again with few words. I'm Kadir Bahar again. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Georgia. I'm teaching graduate courses in gifted and creative education program, and I also direct a lab, Regis Lab, researching excellence gaps in STEM education. I'm a former engineer and a teacher of mathematics. I have coached mathematically gifted students for long years for math competitions. I'm a columnist at one of the practical journals in the field, teaching high potential. I write for iMath Education column, and my research focuses on excellence gaps and mathematical creativity and mathematical precocious learners. I want to start with a fable to my presentation today. That's what I do with my graduate course students and doctoral level learners for introduction to identification and assessment of gifted and creative learners. We talk about the equity issues in identification. The name of the fable is The Animal School by George Reeves. Maybe some of you know about it, but we are going to discuss about equity through that fable. Once upon a time, the animals decided they must do something heroic to meet the problems of a new world. So they organized a school. They adopted an activity curriculum consisting of running, climbing, flying, and swimming. To make it easier to administer the curriculum, all the animals required to take all the subjects. The eagle was considered a problem child and was disciplined severely. In the climbing class, she beat all the others to the top of the tree, but she insisted on using her own way of getting there. Another student was Doug. The dog was excellent in swimming, in fact, better than his instructor, but he made only passing grades in flying and was very poor in running. Since he was slow in running, he had to stay after school and also drop his swimming class in order to practice running. He kept this up until his webbed feet were badly worn. And he was only average in swimming, but average was acceptable in school, so nobody worried about that except the dog. The rabbit started at the top of his class in running, but had a nervous breakdown because of so much makeup work in swimming. Squirrel led the climbing class, but her flying teacher made her start her flying lessons from the ground instead of the top of the tree, and she developed Charlie horses from overexertion at the takeoff and began getting C's and D's in the classes. The practical prayer dogs stayed out of the school and fought the tax levy because the administration wouldn't add digging and borrowing to the curriculum. They apprenticed their children to badgers and later joined the groundhogs and gophers to start a successful private school. At the end of the year, an eel that could swim exceedingly well, run, climb, and fly a little had the highest average, and he was made valedictorian. I usually discuss the message of this fable with my students, and I ask them, what was the take-home message or moral of this fable for you? So I can ask the same question to you with few words. If you don't mind, feel free to put your take-home message on the chat box. I can read them and we can discuss some of them. And meanwhile, I can list what my students usually tell about the moral of that fable. The first and most I hear from them is there are many kinds of giftedness, and domain specificity of giftedness is important. Those are true, and we know that the message of the fable is not every student is gifted. Every kid is a gift, but not everyone is talented and gifted in every domain. We see underachievers, as mentioned in the fable. They might be gifted in some areas, or gifted learners might be achievers too. Another take-home message might be most curricula do not serve to develop our talents and gifts, unfortunately. The best one I like is, I think this fable is a great criticism of our education systems, not in the United States, but all over the world. Education systems are not flexible, and they are not necessarily designed to meet the needs of each specific learners. And I am sure there are many more messages different those what we have discussed. Let me see if there are any you have listed over that. Okay, I will keep going, and then if we have time, we are going to get back to the fable again. But today I'm going to do something different. I'm going to revise the fable. I'm going to make it the gifted school, not the animal school. Then we are going to look at the gifted education or advanced academics from an active perspective. And the question is, what if this school was a gifted school? Not the animal school, but the gifted school designed for gifted and talented learners. We know that the bold goal of gifted education or education is meeting academic and social emotional needs of learners. And AGC, in one of the National Association for Gifted Children, operationalized this definition within two foci. One of them is developing excellence and promoting equity. Those two are listed as the major goals of gifted education. Some of you might question, what about promoting equity? But the gifted education, we know itself is designed for promoting equity for diverse learners, because gifted learners are diverse learners. They are cognitively different from majority of the students. They have different learning characteristics, different social emotional needs, and the gifted education programs and the field itself promotes equity from that perspective. That's supposed to be designed for promoting equity for different learners, exceptional learners. But within that excellence and equity perspective, we can always ask, does gifted education itself really promote excellence, or does it really promote equity? What about if we have inequities or injustice in excellence? Or let's a little bit change the question, and we can ask, Does advanced academics programs or gifted education programs shelter inequity? And this is a very relevant question. And unfortunately, the answer is yes, they do. Gifted education, or throughout the presentation, I'm going to use advanced academics interchangeably with the gifted education, because both of them, I believe, serve the same goal. And we can say, yes, those programs, gifted education programs or advanced academic programs, they can shelter, and they shelter injustice or inequity. We call them excellence gaps. Excellence gaps are disparities at the highest level of academic performance, which is a pretty new term coined by Plucker several years ago. They can exist in any academic or non-academic domains. Usually we see them very prevalent in gifted and talented programs or competitions, academic competitions, or advanced academic programs at the high school level, middle school level, or earlier levels. When we look at the literature, we see that they result from usually unequal access to resources, quality instruction, educational or parental opportunities. Some researcher earlier, they have mentioned that those might stem from differences in cognitive abilities, but they are very prevalent in many programs. Usually we see them, they are based on gender and race, but they might be based on geography, economics of the families, language or linguistic characteristics or cultural identities of students. And also, as well as we can see them, they might be based on differences in cognitive abilities too. We have twice exceptional learners. They might be underrepresented in some advanced academics programs. What we notice is that they are not uniform. They are very dynamic, and they can take different shapes. They might be domain, even task specific, and they can evolve over time. Let me give an example to an excellence gap. Maybe some of you might be familiar with the SAT, which is an university entrance exam in the United States, and in some parts of the world, this is used for different purposes. Students take the exam, and usually scores are from 200 to 800 within mathematics and writing and reading subjects. The top score is 800. And on that graph or on that table, you see different score ranges and how many, what percent of the students place in these ranges. When you look at the average range, which is usually 500 to 500, almost 30% of the students place in that range, we see kind of a parity between boys and girls. The number of boys and girls pretty much similar to each other. But when you move to the right side of the curve, we notice there are some disparities and gaps between the representation of male and female. For example, in the top 1% of the participants, there are one female compared to 3 to 4 male learners in the SAT mathematics course. This is called excellence gap. But it doesn't have to be top 1%. That depends how we operational define our excellence gap. You can say, okay, let's look at the 700 to 800, the top 5, 10%. We can freely define, operationalize the excellence based on any exams or identification tools or course participation or any different programs. But usually in the literature, this is kind of confused with the achievement gaps. Achievement gaps is pretty, have been in the literature for decades, almost a century. The terminology sounds similar, but they are not similar with the excellence gaps. Achievement gaps, it is defined as the differences in average scores between the groups. One group of students that might be gender-based, that might be racial-based. If a group of that outperforms another group significantly in average scores, this is called achievement gap. But excellence gaps are the disparities or gaps in the highest level of academic performance. Let me give another example for achievement gap so we can see the difference between them. As I introduced the difference between males and female representation in the top 1% in SAT math score, let's say this is excellence gap. On the right side, you see an example for achievement gap. The average SAT scores for females, it is about 1,054. For males, it's 1,067. We see differences, but they're close to each other. So it is negligible. When you look into the average SAT math scores, the difference is larger in favor of males. So this is an achievement gap. We don't know how statistically this is significant, but we see a gap over there. In the writing and reading, it is opposite. The difference is favoring females. Females have higher scores in those ones, which is an achievement gap example. I'm going to introduce my research related to excellence gap, but currently in the past 3-4 years, I'm trying to understand the nature of those excellence gap. I look into gender-based and racial-based or race-based excellence gaps in advanced STEM programs, especially high school programs, in specific to mathematics and computer science. And as a platform, I look into the math competitions or advanced placement, AP computer science and AP mathematics programs. If you are not familiar with AP, let me very quickly introduce what is AP program. AP program is a college level program that is available to high school students in the United States and maybe in Canada and Mexico too. But it's getting more prevalent in some other countries in Europe too. High school students, they can take college level courses in the high school by their high school teachers. Almost more than 22,000 schools, high schools in the United States, they offer advanced placement programs, which is 3 out of 4. And as of 2022, over 2 million high school students took at least one AP course. And usually what happens, those courses are year-long courses, and at the end of the year, students are supposed to, if they want to get a credit, take an exam related to that course, which is a nationwide exam administered by College Board. Everybody take the exam on the same day, and they are scored from 1 to 5. 5 is the highest score from that exam. If a student takes 3, 4, 5, this is counted as passing the exam, and some colleges, they accept them as college credit. So if a student takes that exam in the high school and pass it, then they may count that as college credit, and they don't have to take those courses one more time. Usually those classes are taught by certified or trained teachers. And according to statistics, 1 out of 3 students graduated high school with at least one AP course. And there are almost 40 different AP courses from STEM areas to languages, history, English, and this is the list of all AP courses available to students in the United States. For my research, I look at the excellence gaps or disparities, gender disparities, and racial disparities in calculus, computer science, and related courses. AP courses, AP programs, they are not necessarily designed for gifted learners, but the research mentions that the AP program as an advanced academics program plays a natural curriculum delivery role for gifted learners because it provides access to advanced content and provides acceleration, which leads to greater chance at college acceptance, higher college retention, graduation rates. And several researchers have mentioned that enrollment in these courses leads to higher self-confidence and motivation to pursue careers in these fields. So to me, those are natural curricular options for gifted learners. And I look into what are the gender-based and excellence-based gaps in these programs. Usually I can categorize my research into 3 stages. I try to quantify or identify the excellence gap, what they look like, what is the nature of those gaps. And then I look into what might cause those disparities or excellence gaps. And then the final stage is designing interventions. To me, right now, I am just finished my first stage and passing through my second stage through some research opportunities and outlets. And I want to design some intervention eventually to understand how we can diminish those excellence gaps, because they vary. They might be diminished through some sound, robust curricula and policies. In the next several slides, I'm going to introduce you what I have done, what are my takeaways and findings from my research on stage 1, quantifying excellence gaps. In the past 3-4 years, what I have done, again, I looked into gender and racial base in AP calculus, AP mathematics, and computer science courses. I have created tens of different disparity indexes to monitor and to identify these gaps. And I have looked into over 15 million students' mathematics and computer courses, participation and achievement in those courses through College Board's national summary reports. And I have used several different data analysis techniques. Some of them were adapted from engineering and hydrology areas, which are very common in these places. And those are my publications from the past 3-4 years related to quantifying excellence gaps. And let me summarize or report what I have found related to those disparities. First of all, I want to thank my university for funding my research through Early Career Award to understand the nature of excellence gaps. On the bottom of the slide, you see 3 tables, little tables. One of them is on the left side is computer science courses. That shows 2 courses, which is AP Computer Science Principles, a basic computer science AP program. The next one is a more advanced course in computer science. In the bottom, in the middle, you see mathematics courses, 2 mathematics courses. On the right side, you see 3 AP physics course students take in the high school. The numbers right next to the each course represents the ratio of males or boys to girls in these courses in top achieving learners. I operationally defined top achievement as scoring the highest score, 5 out of 5 among the participants. And those numbers represent the male to female ratios as of 2020. For example, on the very right bottom, you see a red circle that shows 3.56. That number represents the number of males for each female received the highest score in AP Physics course, AP Physics C course, 3.56. That means there were 3 or 4 boys who received the highest score, while there were only 1 female learners who scored the highest one. So that's a very big, very wide excellence gaps, gender-based excellence gap. So while I was trying to understand the nature, the shape of those excellence gaps, what I have found, the number one thing which is very significant from those findings, the achievement gaps are very related to disparities in participation. On the right side of the tables, you see the disparities or male to female ratios in participation, not achievement or excellence. If you compare the 2 red circles on the top and bottom, the top one is the disparity between the males and females in exam participation. On the bottom side, you see the disparities or the male to female ratio in exam participation, which means there were 3.19 males for each female among the participants in the classroom throughout the year. So this study, we have looked into the correlation about between the exam participation and exam top achievement. And the number one thing we have found is when you have disparities in participation, that will lead to disparities, excellence gaps in top achievement. So disparities in participation is a major reason for disparities, which might sound pretty straightforward, but that gives a message to curriculum designers or educators that if you want to get rid of the achievement gaps or excellence gaps, first you have to make sure that the interest, the participation in programs and classrooms are reaching to parity. Then you can diminish the top achievements or excellence gaps in those programs. And another thing is, meanwhile, I'm talking about the gender disparities, gender-based excellence gaps, or racial excellence gap. But you can think about your own education system, your own country's excellence gaps, what they are. They might be gender-based, they might be twice exceptionality, that might be based on ethnicity, language, culture, religion, whatever it is, but those are different types of excellence gaps. The number two thing we have found from the early stage of that research is they're not fixed. They don't stay constant. They vary over the years, which is good. If they were constant, if they were fixed, probably that was a very strong message that, okay, this is coming from nature, related to nature-nurture discussion, and there are not much you can do. But we know that cognitive abilities or our performances in academics, they develop in environments, and nurture has an important influence on those ones. So having those graphs that shows they are not fixed, they vary over the years, it's a strong message that as educators and researchers and policymakers, we can do something. We can change them. We can diminish them. On this graph, what you see is an female to male ratio. Among the AP mathematics, the highest level of mathematics course, calculus BC, and top achievement disparities. On the left side, you see numbers from 0 to 120. That shows how many females were represented for each male. So those are less than one, different from the earlier slides. That shows that the more it is more female students are underrepresented. So in 1997, when we started collecting data, it was around 0.42, 43s. But in the past several years, we saw that those numbers reached to 0.6. So it is a 0.2 an increase in the past 20 years, which is pretty significant. And through some trend analysis, we have shown that increase is significant. It is good, but unfortunately, it's not enough. We should do more and more in terms of policies and decisions and curriculum designs to reverse that gap very quickly. We cannot, according to our findings, closing the gap will take about several more decades, maybe even a century, to reach that parity line, which is 1. That's what we want to reach. Again, they are not fixed. They vary over the years, and through some different kind of factors, they might diminish or they might get wider. Likely, we see that those are getting smaller and smaller year by year. But interestingly, if you just look at the general male-female comparison, there will be pictures you will miss. And you have to have some micro-level analysis of those gaps to understand what they look like. If you look only into the general population, that might seem different. But if you dissect it into different groups, like in my study, I have dissected into different racial groups or ethnicities. You can do it for your own education system. You can understand, is everyone affected, every group of students affected similarly from those excellence gaps? In my case, this graph shows participation throughout the years in the past 20 years in the United States for AP mathematics exams. And what you see is on this is the parity line again. That's the line we want to reach. There are 4 groups which is under the parity line: Native Americans, Hispanic population, white population, and Asian American population. Females are underrepresented, unfortunately. And unfortunately, again, Females from white population, they are the most underrepresented group, which represent the which is being represented by the close, diminishing, but still it is a significant underrepresentation. On the top of the parietal line, there is an interesting picture that shows that compared to other 4 racial groups, Black learners, females from Black communities, they are overrepresented. Males were underrepresented in participation in AP Mathematics, Calculus, BC courses. So if we didn't dissect that into the groups, then we wouldn't able to notice that what is going on in the schools which is dominantly serving Black community. Or if you change the picture, what is going on for the females in the white dominated schools. So you cannot catch that if you don't have a micro level analysis, which is about the intersectionality. So Lozano, which is one of the pioneers of the intersectionality theory, as well as the Crenshaw, they suggest that we have to look into understanding these gaps and disparities from different perspectives. It's not just gender, it's not just race, but it is an intersectionality of different cultural identities. So you have to understand from different perspectives to understand what is going on. And another finding or another nature belongs to excellence gap. What we have found is when the programs or when the courses get more advanced, those gaps, regardless of what they are coming from, they were getting wider and wider. In this graph, you see 3 different course groups. On the left side, it is computer science courses. CS stands for computer science. In the middle, it is physics course, 2 physics course, and on the right side, you see 2 mathematics course. The blue bars, they represent more basic courses, and the right side, the orange bars, they represent more advanced courses. And those are the disparities in participation, not even achievement. Achievement gaps were wider. When you look into participation gaps, we noticed that they are getting wider. The overrepresented group in the basic courses were significantly more overrepresented in the more advanced programs. So that's another thing about the nature and the shape of excellence gaps, what we have figured out. When we move from the first stage to second stage of the research agenda, we have noticed that there's a problem with the persistence of females in terms of representation in the higher levels of STEM areas or STEM workforce. And in the literatures, there is a significant and a large, very thick amount of studies that talks about what contributes to persistence. And the early studies, especially in the gifted education area, we see that many researchers, they mention about differences in cognitive abilities, which contributes to persistence. Usually special abilities or differences in mental abilities, those were reported as the major factor for persistence. But in my current research, we see that isolation and microaggressions, which are kind of biases that are not designed purposefully, but they were there without purpose, or sometimes they are implicit, sometimes they are explicit, but they represent an important, significant value for contributing to differences in persistence. And especially in the identification process in gifted education, those microaggressions are really big. They may be like kind of an identification tool problem, biases in assessments. Those contribute to these differences in the later stages. And self-efficacy, we don't have significant results right now to discuss with you, but what we have figured out, the major reason behind the persistence or representation is lack of self-efficacy. Those usually stem from stereotype threats in mathematics and STEM courses. Parental encouragement. Usually we notice that the parents, they have different attitudes when they're raising their boys and girls for and motivating them for STEM subjects and other subjects. That applies to teachers too, unfortunately. Teachers are not prone from those biases, and we noticed that students reported that their teachers had different encouragement based on the gender of the students for hiring and recruiting to next level of courses or competitions or programs for students. That tells us that that might seem very straightforward, but when there's a less women in a STEM subject or STEM course, we see this is because there is a less women, there's a few women in that course. Think about it. If there is only one or two girls in a computer science, high school computer science class, then the next level of students coming from the lower level of grades, they will see that, and they will have less belonging to that environment and that group. So there will be less women because there is currently less women in that area. Don't take it just gender based. You can think about why we have less dyslexic gifted students in a gifted program, because that might be related to lower level of representation in those classes. If educators, parents, and school level policies do not focus on them, then there will be always lower number of underrepresented populations in those groups, which have been supported by that graph, which is from NCES Department of Education reports, which shows the in this graph we see the bachelor degrees earned by women in the United States in different disciplines and majors since 1970, in the past 40, 50 years. If you look into the very bottom, you usually notice the STEM areas. That includes mathematics, physical science, computer engineering, computer science, and engineering. 50 years ago, 4 or 5 decades ago, we had very little, maybe we can call it even, they didn't even exist in these fields, females. But in the time, in the past 3 or 4 decades, those representation increased. That also applies to all other domains too. In the health profession, for example, the representation started with 75%, which is pretty large. That shows education, psychology, and many public administration and public service jobs and majors. They have been dominated by women. But when the major or domain changed, we see significant differences. However, regardless of whatever the domain or majors or the workforce is, we see that there is a change, there is a significant increases or decreases that supports our statement when there is a few women in STEM, because we had fewer women in the past, or that will also lead to the future predictions too. So that shows how it is important to increase the representation of underrepresented groups in courses, programs, that includes gifted and talented programs or advanced academics programs, so we can diminish the excellence gaps and representation issue for students. In the last and future research, my goal and motivation would be in diminishing these disparities and excellence gaps. And I follow a different path. I propose using counter spaces to bridge the gaps, and which is currently I am working on designing my research agenda based on designing counter spaces. What counter space is actually a program. It might be an academic or social program or a safe space that allows students, underrepresented students, females, different racial or ethnic groups, or coming from a different cultural identity group, to promote their own learning, wherein their experiences are validated and viewed as critical knowledge. And students in those programs, they get aware of the microaggressions at their schools, and they avoid discrimination and challenge those deficit thinking skills and deficit notions of people, especially people of color, people of gender, and people of different racial backgrounds. So as an example, what we are doing currently, we are designing a counter space for high school students in advanced AP computer science courses, and we are leveraging counter spaces to bridge those gaps longitudinally in the next several years. We use several tools in that counter space that includes peer mentorship. The older, for example, or the more experienced girls who have taken those AP courses, they become mentors for the new students, female students taking those courses, and they motivate them to persist in the classroom and being successful in these programs. Not just the peer mentoring, but also mentoring from the others age levels, especially high school, especially undergraduate college learners have been wonderful role models for high school students, graduate students, and specialists, and people who have been seen as role models by the younger generation. We include them in the counter space, and they meet frequently through online or face-to-face meetings, like an after-school program. And they motivate, not necessarily just academically, but also psychologically. They prepare learners, especially females of color, to persist in the field and domain. That's how we design our counter spaces to bridge, leverage them to bridge gender-based excellence gaps. So again, it doesn't have to be gender-based. I have spoken about them because this is my research agenda focuses on. That's my expertise. That's what I know. But there are different types of excellence gaps, and there are different types of factors that contribute to different types of excellence gaps. Why they are important? They are important because they are really great indicators of injustice or justice in education settings. Sometimes we do not even know about them. Sometimes we don't even care about them. So they may be implicit, hidden, but they're really good predictors of future disparities and social justice in labor markets. For example, women occupy only 1 out of 4 jobs in computing science, which is, as I have introduced, which is very similar to what we have in AP computer programs. So underrepresentation in earlier pre-collegiate level education programs, they lead to underrepresentation in the workforce and in every piece of the life society. So that's why they are important. Again, they take different shapes. Sometimes it is a gender-based, sometimes it is language-based, sometimes it is geographically. Rural students, for example, they might be less represented in some programs due to the lack of resources and availabilities. So we have to start with a critical lens. We have to criticize, is there a gap, disparity among students in that program? For example, you are leading or you are coaching a mathematical program, after school program at your school, and you notice that there are less girls, number of girls in the program. So that's a time to identify, quantify them, and start with a critical lens and ask why, what might contribute to them, why we have less female students, how we can diminish them. And again, like those might be the stages we can look into understanding and dealing with these excellence gaps. Last year, I have started, several years ago, I have moved to Georgia from Wisconsin in the United States, and I have a yard right now, and I didn't have to deal with grass or weeds at my backyard before. But in the past 2 years, I was interested in developing a yard and dealing with some green, nice grass. And I noticed that I have to deal with the weeds. Weeds are kind of, if you are familiar with the backyard, controlling grasses, keeping them green in your houses, dealing with the weeds are a problem. And I have been dealing with that problem in the past couple of years. What I have noticed is dealing with excellence gaps is pretty much similar to dealing with the weeds. So as a kind of a metaphor, I use that to work on those issues. You have to have a comprehensive weed control plan. If you don't know what they do look like, what types of weeds you have, there is no way you can deal with them, because each weed has a different biological and structural growth and development. So you have to address what types of weeds I have. This is a kind of invariance in gaps I have represented, I have shared with you. And another important thing is you have to be proactive. You have to monitor them continuously. Usually the grass takers, they deal with two types of actions to deal with these wild weeds in the garden. One of them is pre-emergent actions, which means you solve the problem before they get implicit or emergent. You target the seeds and you kind of kill them when before they grow. Those are pre-emergent actions, which kind of relates to policies and interventions we can think about before the existence of the disparities. What about my curriculum? What about my school environment? What about the teacher's knowledge, pedagogical knowledge? Are they good enough to prevent those excellence gaps before they get born? Teachers, are they well informed about how to improve student self-efficacy? Are they biased? Those are pre-emergent actions. And we have emergent actions. Those apply after these disparities and gaps grow and become more visible. Usually curriculum designers and policymakers, they can target those disparities to diminish them across the years. Without having those actions, still like the disparities might diminish over the years, but they may take decades, centuries, like we have in the United States. Without any planned and comprehensive action, you cannot just expect them to go away. And another thing, what we have found is one type of action plan doesn't apply to everybody, or one size doesn't fit all, like we have known from many educational settings. We have to focus on our yards, and we have to focus on our own weed problem, which might be different from other schools. This is what education systems are. The education systems bring different problems, and the excellence gaps, the disparities we have in the United States, they are different from the excellence gaps in China or in Germany or in Brazil. So even like within the same country, cities might be different. Even within the cities, schools might be different. Within the past several years, we have seen there are really big changes in the society that comes with the technology and movements of the societies. Immigration has been evolving, and we have more refugees in different countries, and we have more people moving from their homelands to different places. So within the schools, within different schools, we might have different shape of disparity. So we have to be taking a building norm and focusing on each school disparities individually. And another important discussion is sometimes we might have a very large amount of focus on equity, but if this is not in balance, if you put all of your efforts for equity, then the excellence might be neglected. So if you remember, the goal of the education or gifted education is promoting equity and promoting excellence. While you deal with excellence, you shouldn't neglect equity, or vice versa. The system should be balanced, and we should aim weeds, not grass, and we shouldn't lose excellence. We shouldn't lose excellence to equity. That's another thing I can share with you from my studies and research. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Hopefully in the upcoming World Gifted conferences, I will have more research data and findings to share with you from my third stage research related to design of counter spaces and interventions to diminish these gaps. Thank you so much for listening to me. I am turning the microphone to Eleanor for questions, if you have any. As I remember, please feel free to put your questions on the right side of the discussions. Am I right, Eleanor?
Yes, you are. Kadir, thank you very much for a very, very interesting lecture. I really enjoyed it. I noticed that there were some questions, and I just picked them out in the order that they came in. There was a question by Martina Rosenbaum, and she asked, related to the male and female comparison, did you compare black girls to black boys?
Eleanor, would you mind repeating that? I had a loss in my sound.
Okay, sorry. Martina Rosenbaum asked a question, and she asked, related to the male and female comparison, did you compare black girls and black boys?
Yeah, I think that was one of the slides we had. We have compared different groups across different races, especially for the study on AP mathematics programs. Different from the rest of the racial groups in the United States, black girls were overrepresented, or they dominated the AP mathematics courses compared to black male population.
Okay. And additional to this question, Sule Gucheta asked, and I should, she said, I don't know if I missed it while listening to your speech. One point that caught my attention was the difference in the underrepresentation between black girls and white girls. Have you done any, let me see, have you done any work on the reasons for this? What could be the reasons for that situation?
Yep. We have done several research on the racial differences in AP computer science programs between races, and we have dissected it based on the gender and race. Again, as I said, the first stage of all of those studies were to quantify and to understand what they look like. And identifying the factors, especially there's a very big, very thick literature that focuses on achievement gaps, and also the literature on excellence gaps are growing year by year. Currently, we are collecting data about that. We have looked into disparities in the racial and gender intersectionality. I don't have much significant findings now to share with, but hopefully in a couple months we will have a more structured, robust findings. What I can only say is there are differences across black girls and white girls. And white girls, they highly outperforms in terms of numbers in the representation of black girls. Probably the ratio of white girls to black girls is something like 5-1. 6-1, which is pretty significant and pretty big. Even like when you compare Asian Americans and black girls, that number can increase to 30-1, 25-1. And there are a lot of things that contributes to that. For example, not every school that serves black communities, they provide advanced academics programs. That's a big problem. That's a big systematic microaggression. And we have isolations. We have isolated programs. Not every school believes the advanced academics programs, they help. Usually zip codes, the place where you live in, is pretty much a big source of discrimination. And we also see that historically the underrepresentation of some groups represented in the programs, that contributes to the current and future disparities too. There are 2 papers I have published about that. I can talk more about it, but currently we are looking into the understanding what else other than participation, usually like self-efficacy beliefs, parental and teacher encouragement, might contribute to those differences. And we are currently, our findings says that those are pretty big issues that contribute to those differences, especially the stereotypes in the media. Computer science are for boys, or how the media or our readings kind of presented, that kind of establish our mindset and growth mindset, and that gives a strong message to learners, young students. So they decide participating and persisting in or not in the programs.
Okay, I think we have time for another question. Margaret Sutherland asked, can you clarify what you said about the peer mentors? She was having internet issues, so she missed some bits, and she wanted to know who have to act as mentors for younger boys.
Thank you so much for this question too. I have a little bit mentioned about that, I think, in one of the presentations slides, but I'm trying to go back to the slide to show that one more time. Oh, yep. And the question was, again, I am sorry.
The question was, who have to act as mentors for younger boys?
Oh, okay. The mentors. There are implicit and explicit mentors. And let's think about that. You have a computer science program. There are 20 boys in this classroom, and there are only 2 girls in that classroom, and which is a case in many classrooms in the United States, unfortunately. And those boys, 20 boys in that classroom, naturally, automatically become a role model for the younger learners. This is a peer mentoring. This is undesigned, but it's a natural peer mentoring. So those 20 boys will be 20 mentors in the school for the rest of the boys upcoming. But there are only 2 girls for the rest of the school to motivate them, if they can, for taking an advanced STEM program. So this is what we have looked into. What are the peer mentoring things that exist? But in the counter space, we are proposing the counter space comes with the designed peer mentoring activities. We are going to test out how those designed activities, peer mentoring activities, can influence representation longitudinally. But unfortunately, I don't have the data right now to share. Hopefully in the next World Gifted Conference, I might have more tangible things to present.
Okay, I think we're going to our final question. That's one by Catherine Reed, and she said, in my own context, lower achievement by marginalized pupils is often seen as natural, and attempts to improve attainment for those students is pointless, unfair to unmarginalized pupils for both. Did you see similar attitudes in your research, and what should we do about such an attitude?
Yeah, I think this is a very natural approach to these disparities. It is common to almost all countries. People believe, including, this is not just regular educators, that includes some researchers too. Sometimes researchers believe those are coming from differences in cognitive abilities. We have a very huge, thick research agenda or research literature that shows that females are underrepresented in STEM, especially in mathematics and computer science, in the history because of the differences in cognitive abilities. They have been reported that special abilities are limited, or their quantity achievements or quantifying abilities were limited. So that's why they have been underrepresented. And but unfortunately, we know that nurturing makes a difference, and our abilities from a social cognitive perspective and constructivist perspective, they grow in the nurture and educational environments. For example, before 1930s, if you go and check what was going on in the mathematics department in Oxford University, you wouldn't happen to have any females, any girls over there. And the reason was because as a female, you were allowed to go to Oxford mathematics department, but you were not being given a diploma, even like you graduate. 1930s, 1940s, even like less than 100 years ago. So how come you can expect that females can compete or can live in that environment? It is not, they wouldn't belong, self-belonging into that environment. So comparing the cognitive abilities, just designing some tools and checking, hey, what is going on? Who has better cognitive abilities wouldn't make much difference in that environment because the participation is not equal. Even they are equal, they were not developed in the similar situations. We didn't have nurture for that perspective. And that was common to almost all countries. When you look at the PISA scores or TIMSS test, you can see that. Some countries are more advantageous, some countries are more disadvantageous, but historically, almost every culture, every society, they have their own excellence gaps, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, since we're not being kicked out yet, I take another question. Eva van der Grove asked, have you compared the attitude of parents of different population groups towards education?
We didn't do it yet, but we have collected data, but we didn't analyze. But fortunately, there's a really good amount of literature on that one. And those literature says that, unfortunately, regardless of the background, regardless of the education level of the parents, parents are biased and they motivate boys more toward computer-related or engineering-related or mathematics heavy areas, while they motivate their girls or daughters for the opposite area. And unfortunately, that's there.
Yeah. I'm very sorry to cut you short, Kadir, because I would have loved to listen for at least 2 hours to more information, but we need to end this session. I again want to thank you for your excellent contribution to our conference. And again, I would like to thank the Center for Talent and Development at Northwestern University for sponsoring this keynote session. I would like to thank the audience for staying focused as long as they were. And I wish you all a very good and interesting day. And please give Kadir a big hand for today's contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and thanks for everyone.